This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook, Chapter 44, Atlas, My Savior. With the house sold, off we went to Seattle. I remember Mom and Dad doing a lot of packing, but I pitched in too, at least with my bedroom. At 14, let's just say I had collected a few personal belongings that it would perhaps not be prudent or in my best interest to acknowledge the possession of. As they packed boxes, I had to quietly slip a few things inside. This was a challenge, but I was ahead of them and they, of course, were quite distracted. In a few instances, I had to relocate a few special items to the woods out back and then retrieve them under cover of dark, pack them securely, and then retape the boxes. Highest up on my priority list was my explosive flash powder. I had just a few pounds left, so the stuff was like gold dust to me. As we finally headed out of town, I recall thinking about the moving van's 3,000-mile summer journey from Miami to Seattle. Just how hot does it get inside a big truck like that, out in the glaring sun all day, as it roars across the deserts of Arizona and New Mexico? Hot enough to spontaneously ignite flash powder? I had heard of moving vans simply overheating and bursting into flames, burning to the ground along the roadside. In this event, what would be the effect of a few pounds of flash powder thrown into the conflagration? I just hoped that in this disturbing case, the movers were not standing too close nearby, observing the fiery scene. My conclusion, based on a few years of pyrotechnic experimentation, was that the entirety of my family's belongings would be heavily charred and widely scattered across the desert floor. Within a few weeks following the move, our lives had been readjusted and we settled into our new home on the shores of Lake Washington, south of Seattle, in a small and sleepy town named Bellevue. Ours was a dramatically altered world, given the shocking geographic and climatic change we all now needed to embrace. Gone was the heat, copious amounts of insects, sand, palmettos, crushing humidity, palm trees, a warm ocean, swimming pools, Essie, and my partners in so many small crimes. They had been replaced by evergreens, mountains, bears, bald eagles, marijuana, constant drizzle, frigid waters, and a new cast of neighborhood buddies who might have been even more skewed than the ones I had sadly left behind. I popped in through the front door one day after school and, as was my pattern, headed straight to the kitchen. Dad was sitting at the same heavy table we had in Miami. It had a cream-colored, floral wrought iron base with a heavy, polyethylene-coated mahogany tabletop. He had made the top himself, sourcing an old piece of wood and somehow encasing it in the thick resin. He and that table would crisscross the country 3 more times before they both found their final resting places, his in the hills of Virginia and the table's all the way back in South Miami. Dad had a very sober look on his face. Before him was the large World Book Encyclopedia Atlas we all used grudgingly from time to time for school research projects. Its normal home was atop the hutch in my bedroom. World Book Encyclopedia hit its stride in the 1960s. If World Book was a muscle car with 4 gears, it had just shifted smoothly into 4th and was pulling away. So had Encyclopedia Britannica. Both companies ruled the at-home reference book business. Invented by the Fuller Brush Company and replicated with success by a number of others, the door-to-door sales model was flourishing, driven by growing affluence and the ever-expanding suburban experiment that sprawled across America after World War II. Both companies advertised extensively in popular magazines, newspapers, on radio and TV, and then sold the leads for a few dollars each to an army of independent contractors who would then use this approach to sell a set of encyclopedias to families with young children. What parents in America at that time, spawning broods, would refuse to invest a few dollars a month and deny their young darlings the resources they needed to secure a good education? To the glee of legions of encyclopedia salesmen, apparently scant few. Very few parents could say no. The booksellers understood this psychoeconomic leverage point and exploited it aggressively. The encyclopedia business boomed. It was a downhill, high-speed run on superbly waxed and finely tuned skis. Then a couple of geeks on the left coast invented something called the personal computer, a massively disruptive global event. Almost overnight, it tilted the world. World Book and Britannica soon careened from surging growth into a fight for their lives. At that time, the encyclopedia publishers were actually large manufacturers. They made very heavy books and used huge amounts of human labor and paper and all manner of binding materials to publish and then ship their weighty tomes to innumerable towns and cities across the land. A set weighed a few 100 pounds. Add the optional bookshelf, and it got heavier still. With the PC revolution, all that was a classic collection of encyclopedias became instantly obsolete, as the emerging digital world placed an entire set of books on a CD-ROM that could be produced by the millions for 18 cents apiece. The road had suddenly turned sharply, and neither encyclopedia publisher could adapt and make the curve. Both spun out and crashed. Back in Bellevue earlier that afternoon, my mom had smelled smoke. Strangely, even though she smoked incessantly, she had the most acute sense of smell. She alerted Dad. Concerned that the new home was somehow on fire, they began to urgently move through each room to discover the source. In short order, Dad was in my bedroom. He had found the fire and abundant smoke, and he threw open my windows to clear the air. Atop my hutch sat the Atlas. Leaning down on top of it was my telescoping, bright yellow plastic reading lamp. Some idiot, me, had not only left it turned on with its bright, hot, 150-watt bulb aglow, but had folded it up in such a way that it was actually resting right on top of the 4-inch thick book. All day, the hot lamp had been doing its best to slowly, page by page, bore a hole right through the Atlas. It had been performing its appointed task admirably. By the time Dad discovered the ticking time bomb, it was 3/4 of the way through, page 967, heading soon to the top of my wooden hutch. As I sat before my dad and listened to his laborious lecture about the dangers of fire and all the horrible things that could have happened had they not been home or been outside in the yard, I suddenly had the most gut-wrenching and truly terrifying realization. My stomach spasmodically contracted to the size of a walnut, and the blood drained from my face. I froze solid and did my best to patiently and attentively hear Dad out as he continued to dispense his sage advice. Before long, the point was made and well taken. He stood up and handed me the heavy atlas, with a large black hole burned nearly through. I could smell it. One more frown thrown my way, and I was dismissed. My urge was to run to my bedroom, but instead I walked slowly toward it, atlas held out in front like a serving tray. I entered and closed the door, shaking violently, and stood still for a few moments to make sure Dad wasn't going to pop in with a final admonition. All was quiet. I slowly approached my hutch. I could barely force myself to slide open the top drawer that rested an inch below where the atlas had smoldered most of that day. When I did, I saw what I dreaded. There, in the right rear corner, Sealed tightly in a plastic freezer bag, was a full pound of highly explosive flash powder. Had that lamp burned its way through the Atlas and ignited this quantity of powder, the effects would have been, let's just say, impressive. The southeastern quadrant of my home would have disappeared in a brilliant ball of fire and smoke. Then there was the cache of additional powder hidden in my closet, and the other one in my underwear drawer. It was truly painful to sit on the edge of my bed and consider the possibilities and ultimate outcome had Dad not discovered the smoldering Atlas. Where might my parents have been at the terminal moment? My memory was jolted back to an earlier time in Miami when my Aunt Fanny paid us an extended visit. My parents graciously offered her accommodations, sharing my bedroom. The two single beds were separated by a small chest with a cupboard at the bottom and a drawer at the top. A heavy chain smoker. Aunt Fanny would need a handy ashtray nearby, so Mom was thoughtful enough to provide a large one atop the chest. I stored the usual possessions of a young teen in the cupboard, including a Bowie knife, Mad magazines, a pair of police-issue handcuffs, and my favorite fully operational switchblade, secured at a cutlery store I had come upon one day wandering the streets while attending an international regatta in Turku, Finland. How it traveled all the way back home undetected is unclear. The chest drawer held mostly a healthy supply of flash powder. The handcuffs were not a long-term possession. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Lobster thought it an entertaining idea to shackle me to the banister, only to realize soon afterward that the keys to release me had been inconveniently misplaced. After an hour or so of turning both our bedrooms upside down and hunting foolishly for a simple handsaw in Dad's well-equipped shop, my exasperated and embarrassed mother finally called the local police. Soon, an officer arrived holding a large ring of assorted keys. With a stern and authoritative demeanor, softened by an occasional chuckle, he eventually found the one needed to release a small and innocent prisoner, and I raced out through the front door and into the yard. The officer strode back to his patrol car, confiscated handcuffs in hand. He frowned at me and saluted as he drove slowly away up the street, most certainly en route to his next emergency. Back to my roommate, Aunt Fanny. Arriving home from school one afternoon, I was taken aback to find her large ashtray just brimming with cigarette butts. She had rested in bed reading all afternoon, puffing up a storm just inches from an impressive powder keg. My heart skipped at least a few beats, and I promptly relocated the powder to my more secure underwear drawer well across the room. All concluded quietly and without incident. Aunt Fanny soon departed and headed back north. There would be a good deal less chatter and a lot less smoke. Neither she nor my parents were ever the wiser and remained quite unaware of the explosive way in which a quiet afternoon relaxing with a cigarette and a good book might have ended. As I sat somberly in my Seattle bedroom, for the first time I considered a mother who would mail order a preteen son the material sufficient to blow up their house. It wasn't a question of what was she thinking, but rather, was she thinking? She didn't just place a single order during some distraction or a short-term mental lapse. Repeatedly, over a period of 5 years, I would inform her that I was running low. We would fill out the order form together, check the boxes for either smoke or flash powder, and the type and length of fuse. She would write a check, address and stamp the envelope, and I'd run it out to the mailbox, making certain to flip up the little red flag. Contemplating the various scenarios and disturbing memories that late afternoon was a bit overwhelming. I quit thinking about how I almost blew up my house and the fact that, as so often was the case, Mom and Dad really didn't know what they were dealing with, and headed to the kitchen for dinner. Little did we know a modern-day pirate was on the loose in our neighborhood, and he lived right next door. Up next is Chapter 45, and it's called Old Trunk.